Building and running a sales organization is one of the hardest operational challenges in business. There are millions of jobs to do every day that fall upon stretched people who already have too much on their plate. Nothing exemplifies that more than the role of the sales leader in the organization. And there are 5 key challenge areas that they face. My name's Alex McNaughton, co-founder and co-CEO of Grow AI. This problem space matters so much to me because I've lived it. In my first ever sales role when I was 19, I was thrown into the leadership seat early, and by the time I was 20, I had a team of 15 people reporting to me. And it was a mess. I had no idea what I was doing. Predictability was just not a thing in that business. And, I learned the hard way how these things can go wrong. And then when I got out and started working at other organizations and then moved into consulting and building companies, I saw these same 5 challenges across every business. Number 1 is sales and customer execution. Making sure salespeople are prepared for their meetings, making sure that the team is efficient, that it's effective, that it's performing, that the customer conversations that are happening are exceptional. What this looks like when it's not going well is that sales leader diving into deals, diving into the sales conversations, and having to be the savior and carry the team. And the problem with that is it's not scalable. The second area is CRM hygiene. If you have unreliable data, that has downstream effects on everything from forecasting to prioritization. You need good data in order to make good decisions. The third area is forecasting. Now, obviously, this flows directly from number 2. And if your data is bad, you can't make good decisions and you can't predict where you're going to land at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, and at the end of the year. The fourth area is coaching and performance. This is one of the most neglected area for every sales leader. And it is almost always the first area that gets dropped off the list when things are busy. The problem is it's also one of the most impactful areas to performance. The fifth and final area is cross-functional collaboration. Every great sales organization needs to work in tandem with other parts of the organization, whether that's sales and customer success, sales and marketing, and sales and product. No matter what size organization, all of these problems were felt. Whether it was a service company, a technology company, whether they were a 5-person sales organization or a 500-person sales organization, every company has these problems. There are so many problems that can happen around sales and customer execution that I could probably speak about that for hours, but I'll give a few examples. So there's definitely a difference in how these problems play out depending on the size of the organization. If you're a 5 or a 10-person org, your problems are quite different to if you're a 1,000-person sales organization. When you're a 5 or 10-person sales organization, the sales leader has to do everything themselves. So they are RevOps, they are sales enablement, they are recruitment, they are all of the things all of the time. When you move into a larger organization, the actual work starts to get spread around. You have a dedicated sales enablement person or team, you have a dedicated talent team, etc. And then the problems switch from there's too much work to be done to collaborating and making sure the information is flowing appropriately through the organization. Salespeople who don't have the capability or haven't been developed enough don't show up well enough with customers, and that then leads to lower win rates, slower ramp times for new hires, etc. So unprepared salespeople showing up into customer conversations without the right questions to ask, without having done their homework. And if you imagine you're a salesperson, you've got your calendar stacked with demos and customer conversations, maybe you only have 10 minutes, 15 minutes to prepare for each meeting. And if you've been working a sales opportunity for weeks and months, and the amount of context that is involved in a sale like that, it's impossible to perfectly remember and recall all of that key information and stay on top of what's going on in the market and stay on top of what that customer's been up to in their world, specifically in their industry. So, I think that's one of the hardest parts about being in sales is you need to be so sharp in front of your customers. And in this world of AI and information at our fingertips, the expectations of salespeople seem to be going up and up and up. So what was maybe acceptable 10 years ago, where you could get by with a little bit more charm and a little bit less knowledge, I don't think cuts it anymore. The sheer capability of the team and their ability to execute consistently is a real problem. And then even just identifying what does good look like what does great sales execution look like in an organization? Most organizations don't define that very well. Bigger companies tend to do this better. Smaller companies often struggle here. Growth happens a little bit like this. They'll hire a salesperson, that salesperson will do well, so they'll hire another salesperson, that salesperson will kind of do well, and then very quickly you can end up in a situation where you have sort of a bunch of mercenaries who are all kind of running their own playbooks and nothing is cohesive. And that then gets really hard to scale. It kind of works when you have a team of 5. It stops working when you have a team of 10, 20, 30, because it just doesn't, it stops being cohesive at that point. Salespeople hate being chased for things like CRM hygiene so much. It is fundamentally for the organization and less for the rep. If you think about how CRMs were designed, even, they were not designed for the sales rep. They were designed for the organization. And because of that, log into any of the CRMs and try and update something, try and find your way around. It's a mess, it's painful, it's slow, and it doesn't feel like it's helping you to actually win and close your deals. That's often why it's deprioritized. I think the other problem is organizations then throw over the top of that what feels like meaningless updates that need to happen in order to move deals through the pipeline. So that's when you then start to see things like people just adding in filler notes all the time, like meeting TBC, just so they can, move on with their day. So you have a lot of this, excuse my French, crappy data that just gets put in because organizations haven't really thought through, what are the highest signal pieces of information that we need to collect in CRM and actually what isn't. Organizations don't often do a good enough job to translate to the sales reps why it's so important to fill in CRM and how it can actually help them in their role. It's treated very much from a position of the company needs this versus here's how it can be useful for you and here's how it can help you in your role. As a salesperson, I get it and I get why it's so painful to do. I'd always ask them, when I speak to sales reps about this, though, to empathize with their sales manager and the sales leadership of the company in terms of why this is so important for the company. Put yourself in that sales manager's shoes. They're having to forecast a number up to their boss, whether that's a VP of sales or if they're maybe directly reporting to the CEO in a smaller company. They're having to forecast a number that their job is tied to. And you've got to remember that the average sales leader stays in their role for 17, 18 months. So they don't have very many quarters to prove themselves. And 1 or 2 bad quarters, and that's it. You can be done. If you miss your forecast too much, if you're not accurate, you can be done. So it's so important for the sales leader to be able to accurately predict where the business is going to land. What's really funny, and something I've noticed across just about every company that I've been able to work with over the years, is that everyone just ends up doing this in Excel. So every sales manager, every VP of sales has an Excel spreadsheet where they're actually doing a lot of this forecasting and tracking, which is hilarious because they don't even trust the CRM data. I've seen, Series B companies who forecasted, X and then hit Y, and the difference between those numbers was so vast that it impacted fundraising, for example, and, meant capital raising wasn't able to happen. So, it has serious results when this doesn't happen even down to layoffs, right? Companies that miss their forecast, I've seen teams laid off for forecast misses. So it has serious consequences. I'm going to shout out a long-term customer and friend of mine, Glenn. He went from, sub 10 million revenue, scaled that org to over 100 million revenue in about 3.5, 4 years. And it was just a joy to watch because everything just worked like clockwork. And he always knew where they were going to be, which meant he always knew who he needed to hire and when he needed to hire people by, so that the machine could just keep scaling and scaling and scaling. There's something really magical around watching a well-oiled sales organization that just runs predictably. So there's no doubt that forecasting is closely interrelated with CRM hygiene. They are different areas though, because there is the science of forecasting, and then there's also the art of forecasting, of knowing, based on what's happened in a deal, where it's really at. And I think this becomes like particularly important with, more mid-market and larger enterprise type selling, where there are so many human touch points and you have to sort of judge, okay, like where's this deal really at? Are we really where we think we are? And that when you're dealing with much larger multi-stakeholder opportunities, there's a bit of an art to that too. It's not just purely a science. Predictability is crucial for the business. Jobs are tied to it, etc. The other side of this is prioritization, though, which is where should we as a business be spending our time? Which of our customers are we winning with, and which ones aren't we winning with? Which verticals should we be spending more energy with, and which ones maybe we should deprioritize? And if you don't have good data, you can't do that very well. And this is why it's so tied to CRM hygiene, is because once you have that data, you can then make those decisions, and make those decisions confidently versus just guessing. Prioritization can show up in lots of different ways. So that, there's the obvious ones, like which verticals should we be focusing on? There's also the more nuanced ones, like we seem to be losing deals between stage 2 and stage 3. That's highlighting a potential skill gap in our sales team that we need to go and address. Okay, that now flows into, coaching and sales enablement, because we need to teach our team how to do better discovery because we're losing deals in that stage. Again, like it kind of flows from having the right data, but like once you do, you can then prioritize, okay, which parts of this complicated, multifaceted engine that is our sales organization do we need to address? Where do we need to invest time? And what's actually working pretty well right now, and that we can just scale and double down on. The shape of most sales organizations is pretty consistent. Most companies will have some sort of spread across their sales team that looks a little like this. You'll have 20% of the team who are crushing it, who are top performers, who are always overachieving quota. Then you'll have a middle 60%. And these are sort of your middle of the road performers. They're maybe, 70 to 85% of quota. They're pretty good, but they're not great. And then you've got your bottom 20%. And these are the ones who are really like on the edge. They're the ones who, may or may not make it in any given year. And then over the top of that, you've got your, a good sales organization is probably deliberately churning about 10% of their sales team. They're churning those 10% of underperformers each year to make room for new talent. One of the key goals should be, how can we take that middle 60% of performers and move them up one standard deviation in terms of their performance? Like, what are the skills that we need to give them? What are the capabilities that we need to develop so that they can move closer towards that top 20%? That top 20%, you can make them a little bit better, but they're already crushing it. Like, you can continue to invest in them, but the majority of your efforts should be spent on that middle 60%. Now, the problem is, what often happens is a lot of effort goes into the bottom 20%. And it's a tough one, because I think as a sales leader, you need to quickly identify, can I really improve this rep, or they're just not the right fit for this product, this vertical, this market? Because you can burn a lot of time with an underperforming rep that could have been used actually with a better ROI on that middle 60%. So in order to move that middle 60% up a standard deviation, The only way you can really achieve that is through coaching. And coaching has a lot of misconceptions about it. And it is also the first thing that gets dropped off a busy sales leader's plate when things are crazy. Most sales leaders, for example, don't have the time to listen to all of their team's calls, or even a cross-section of their team's calls once a week. They also don't know how to coach. They've never been shown how to coach themselves. So the only way you can actually change the performance of a team is by investing in the team and investing in their capability and actually working with and coaching them. And it's time consuming. In my last company, we saw the impacts of this. This was sort of how we solved this problem in a very manual, human-led way years ago. My business partner and I and our team would coach these salespeople in their first 3 months of the role. And then we would also do continuing professional development in their first year. Now, what we saw was really interesting. We saw these new hires ramp up in half the time to a company's baseline. The new hire failure rate dropped to 2%. And and often these were very junior people, so they're SDRs and BDRs. They would be promoted to AE roles extremely quickly, often in half the time again, and then would be top performing AEs in year 2. And all of that was just by investing in their coaching and development. A kid we placed at EasyVet in one of Glenn's teams, Chad, he was the SDR. He became their top performing SDR. And then he quickly became an account executive and then became a top performing account executive. And all of that within a 24-month period. And we saw that again and again and again. And the data is actually really clear on this. Like, coaching improves sales performance. It also improves retention as well, which is the other thing that people don't think about so much. But if you invest in your team's capability, they're more likely to stay with the company, not just get better. So it's not just about improving the performance of the existing team, but it's also about how can we get new hires productive as fast as possible. So, like the average ramp time for a new sales hire is, say about 3 months. If you can cut that in half, that's real revenue that the business will be seeing a month and a half sooner. The math on this really stacks up, especially as you start hiring more and more salespeople, is if you can trim the ramp time by 15, 20, 30, 40%, that then has flow-on effects in terms of how much revenue you're able to bring in sooner. But it also then changes your calculus on, how many salespeople you're going to hire and when you're going to hire them. So all of these things have flow-on effects. So if you can have a real focus at a business on coaching and performance development, it makes the world of difference in terms of how effective your sales team is going to be and ultimately where they're going to land at the end of the year. It can sometimes feel daunting as a sales leader, as a sales manager, to have this responsibility of coaching your team. And I think people maybe blow it up a little bit more in their mind than it needs to be. Like, coaching can just be spending 15 minutes with a rep debriefing after a sales call and asking them some questions about how they think it went. Like, coaching is mostly questions-based. Everyone can ask questions, and most sales leaders, if they were salespeople before, can probably ask pretty good questions. So, just like squeezing it in and finding those like micro coaching moments to ask a few questions to get that rep to think through what they've just done or where they're at and how they're working can really make all the difference in the world. Every great sales team needs to be able to work in tandem with other parts of the business. And one of the key areas where this breaks down is sales to customer success. And actually, I'll use an example here of a Series B company that we've been working with. And prior to us working with them, they run a pilot motion, and their sales team were winning lots of opportunities, and then kind of chucking the deal across to customer success, and good luck was sort of the approach. And as a result of that, the pilot conversion that CS was responsible for was low and actually dropping. Although the sales team thought they were doing a really good job, and they were generating a lot of business, because of how they were working with the customer success team, conversions were terrible. And as a result, often the salespeople's commissions were being clawed back because the pilots weren't even converting. So I think that's an example of where it breaks down. Other examples of where this breaks down are sales and marketing. The classic sales team complaining to the marketing team where I need more leads, and marketing then complaining back, well, you're not even closing the ones we're giving you. And when it breaks down, it has real dollar consequences. There's also the classic stereotype of salespeople will say anything to get a deal done, and then product are left with promises that have been made to customers, and suddenly the roadmap is being diverted because salespeople have promised something that the product doesn't do yet. So that's definitely a problem. But equally, the flip side of that is salespeople are on the front lines every single day, hearing and asking questions around where are the gaps in the product? What are the things that we don't have that we need to be more competitive to win more? So there's incredible rich data in every sales conversation that's had across an organization, and making sure that actually translates into good product decisions is really crucial. And to give you a practical example of what we do at Grow is we have a customer insights Slack channel, and every time one of us jumps off a call with a customer, the insights from that call, from a product lens, immediately get pushed into that channel, and then that's used to then inform what integrations do we need to prioritize, what features do we need to release or prioritize that we don't have yet. Making sure that sales and product work well together, particularly in early stage companies where they tend to be more nimble and they are building things faster, is really important. Over the last nearly 14 years, I've seen these same problems across all sorts of shapes and sizes of sales organization. And in my last businesses, I solved these problems, but in human ways, in unscalable human ways. And the exciting part about living in 2026 is AI is now available to us all, and everyone's looking for a solution, and AI has a lot of promise. What we've been seeing, though, is that in most sales organizations today, we're seeing isolated experimentation. We're seeing Anna, the new account executive, running some cool workflows off ChatGPT. We're seeing Brad, the CSM, who's doing some interesting things with Claude Cowork. We're seeing the RevOps manager, who's using Claude to help him in his workflow. But none of it's working cohesively together. We have isolated experimentation, but we don't have a compounding system that gets better and better every day. When Alistair, Dan, and I teamed up, and I took them through these problems that I'd been seeing throughout my 14 years nearly in the sales world, we realized that this was a problem that we wanted to solve and build a solution for together. And that's why we built Grow, because we wanted it to be easy for a sales leader to bring Taylor, our AI teammate, into their team, and for things to just work, for things to compound day in and day out. And that's what Taylor does. When you bring her into your organization, on the first day, she identifies problems across your sales pipeline, across your org. She suggests work she can do to solve it, and then she gets busy. After the first week, she's run dozens of workflows. She's coached your reps. She's helped prepare them for their deals. After a month, she intimately understands your organization. And after a year, she's built and run the operational systems for your organization to scale. You've got most conversations in 2026 are being recorded, so there's a lot of really valuable data in there. And for example, Taylor, our AI agent, helps the busy, stretched sales leader coach and develop their team. Everything from identifying the areas that need coaching through to actually doing the coaching and working directly one-on-one with the reps on the deals they're working on. And then the final thing is a sales leader can actually delegate to Taylor. She's running workflows, looking for, where, how are salespeople performing in their conversations and across their sales opportunities? Where are they winning? Where are they losing? Taylor identifies, a discovery capability gap in an individual rep. And then a busy sales leader can then delegate to Taylor and say, okay, Taylor, go work with that rep on discovery around the current opportunities they're working on, and then report back to me. So Taylor will then actually go and work one-on-one with the reps and then report back to the leader. So fundamentally, what is she doing? She's behaving like a second sales leader almost. She's an extension of that busy stretch sales leader across the team. And that's why we built Grow, because we wanted it to be easy for a sales leader to bring Taylor, our AI teammate, into their team, and for things to just work, for problems just to be solved, for work to be done.